My daughter-in-law slammed the door in my face at Christmas. I was freezing on the porch when a man everyone thought was dead, my son, stepped out of a brand new Rolls Royce. His bodyguards kicked the door open. The whole room froze. Then he said two words. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I stood on the porch of what used to be my home, clutching a small wrapped gift in my trembling hands. The December wind cut through my thin coat like knives, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice in my daughter-in-law's eyes when she opened the door. Marion? Malaya's voice was flat, emotionless. She didn't step aside to let me in, instead blocking the doorway with her perfectly manicured frame. Behind her, I could hear the warm sounds of family gathering. Laughter, clinking glasses, children's voices, all the sounds of Christmas that I was apparently no longer welcome to share. Hello, Malaya. I brought something for little Emma. I held up the gift, a small doll I'd spent weeks saving for. My Social Security check didn't stretch far, but I wanted my granddaughter to have something special from her grandmother. Malaya's eyes flicked to the modestly wrapped package with barely concealed disdain. That won't be necessary. Emma has more toys than she knows what to do with. The rejection hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay composed. I just thought, it's Christmas. Family should be together. Family? She said the word like it tasted bitter. Marion, we've talked about this. Your constant interference isn't healthy for any of us. Emma barely knows you, and honestly, that's probably for the best. Each word was carefully chosen to wound, and they found their mark. I'd been Emma's grandmother for 5 years, but Malaya had systematically pushed me out of her life. First, it was scheduling conflicts that prevented visits. Then it was concerns about my confusing Emma with different rules at Grandma's house. Finally, it became clear that I simply wasn't wanted. Where's Barrett? I asked, hoping my son might intervene. Can I speak with him? Barrett agrees with me. We've discussed this extensively. Malaya's smile was cold, triumphant. He thinks it's time you found your own life instead of trying to live through ours. The lie hit me harder than the truth would have. Barrett had been dead for 3 years. My son, my only child, had died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning. But somehow Malaya still used his memory as a weapon against me. That's not... Barrett would never... I started, but my voice broke. Barrett isn't here to coddle you anymore, Marion. It's time you accepted that. Her voice softened just enough to sound reasonable to anyone who might be listening. Look, I know this is hard, but you need to understand. We're building a life here, and your neediness, it's not fair to Emma. Through the partially open door, I could see Barrett's brother Michael and his wife setting the table. They glanced in my direction but quickly looked away. Even Michael, who used to call me his second mother, had chosen sides. The whole family had closed ranks against me. I just want to be part of Emma's life, I whispered, hating how desperate I sounded. She's all I have left of Barrett. Malaya's expression hardened. That's exactly the problem. You see her as a replacement for Barrett instead of her own person. It's unhealthy, Marion. You need therapy, not access to my daughter. The wind picked up, sending snow swirling around my feet. I'd been standing on this porch for nearly 10 minutes, and not once had Malaya invited me inside. The message was clear. I didn't belong here anymore. Can I at least see her, just for a minute? I won't stay for dinner. No. The word was final, absolute. Marion, I need you to leave. Now. You're upsetting Emma, and I won't have her Christmas ruined because you can't let go. I could hear Emma's laughter from somewhere inside the house, bright and innocent. My granddaughter, who I'd helped bring home from the hospital, who I'd babysat countless nights when Malaya wanted to go out, who used to run to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings. Now she was growing up without me, and soon she wouldn't remember me at all. Please, I said one last time, the word barely audible over the wind. Malaya stepped back and began closing the door. Go home, Marion. Find something else to do with your life. The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. I stood there for a moment, still holding Emma's gift, still hoping the door might open again. Maybe Michael would come out and invite me in. Maybe Emma would ask for her grandmother. Maybe someone would remember that I was supposed to be family too. But the minutes passed, and the only sound was the wind and the muffled celebration continuing inside without me. I finally turned and walked back to my old Honda, my feet crunching in the snow. The car was so cold inside that my breath came out in visible puffs as I sat there, trying to process what had just happened. This was supposed to be our first Christmas without Barrett, but somehow it had become our first Christmas without me too. I'd lost my son to a terrible accident, but I was losing my granddaughter to something much worse: deliberate cruelty. As I drove away from the house where I'd spent so many holidays, where I'd helped Barrett take his first steps and later watched him become a father, I felt something inside me die. The hope I'd been carrying for 3 years, the belief that somehow we'd all heal together, finally crumbled. I was completely alone now, and at 62 years old, I was starting to wonder if this was how the rest of my life would be: cold, empty, and forgotten by the only family I had left. The drive home was a blur of tears and snow, and I almost didn't notice the black car that seemed to be following behind me, its headlights steady in my rearview mirror. I had barely pulled into my driveway when the purr of an expensive engine made me look back. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce was gliding down the street like something from another world. In my modest neighborhood of small ranch houses and aging sedans, it looked completely out of place. My hands were still shaking from the encounter with Malaya, and I fumbled with my keys as I watched the luxury car slow down and turn into the driveway I just left. Through my rearview mirror, I could see it parking directly behind Michael's truck. Something made me kill the engine and wait. Call it curiosity, call it a desperate hope that someone might finally stand up for me. I sat in my cold car and watched as the Rolls-Royce's doors opened. 2 men stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark suits that screamed professional security. They moved with the kind of controlled precision that made my breath catch. These weren't party guests. These weren't family friends. Then the rear door opened. The man who emerged moved with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. He was tall, wearing an immaculate charcoal coat that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and even from a distance I could see the gleam of expensive jewelry at his wrist. But it was his walk that made my heart stop. That purposeful stride, the way he held his shoulders, the slight tilt of his head when he focused on something. I knew that walk. I'd watched it develop from toddler stumbles to teenage swagger to adult determination. "No," I whispered to myself, my breath fogging the cold windshield. "It's not possible." The man approached the front door while his security detail flanked him. One of them spoke into an earpiece. This wasn't a social call. This was business. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the doorbell. He simply waited, as if he knew someone would come to him. And they did. Malaya opened the door, probably expecting a lost delivery driver or confused party guest. The scream that pierced the evening air was so sharp and sudden that I jumped in my seat. Through the open doorway, I could see her stumble backward, her face white as the snow still falling around us. "Hello, Malaya." His voice carried across the cold air, and even muffled by distance and wind, I knew it. That voice had called me Mom for 29 years. That voice had laughed at my terrible jokes and argued with me about curfews and told me about his first kiss. Barrett, my son, who had been dead for 3 years. My son, whose funeral I'd planned while Malaya sobbed dramatically in my arms. My son, whose grave I visited every Sunday with fresh flowers. He was standing on that porch, very much alive, and looking like he owned the world. Michael appeared in the doorway behind Malaya, along with his wife and several other family members. The children hung back, sensing the adult tension but not understanding it. Emma peeked around her mother's legs, curious about the strangers. "You're dead?" Malaya whispered, but her voice carried in the cold air. "You're supposed to be dead." Barrett stepped forward and his security moved with him like extensions of his own body. Plans change. The casual tone, the complete lack of emotion in his voice sent chills down my spine. This wasn't the Barrett I remembered. This man had edges that could cut glass. One of his bodyguards stepped forward and placed his hand on the door. Not pushing, not threatening, just making it clear that retreat wasn't an option. "We need to talk," Barrett said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Barrett, I don't understand." Michael started, but his voice cracked. "The accident, the funeral. We buried you. You buried someone." Barrett's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. "It wasn't me." Malaya was hyperventilating now, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she gripped the doorframe. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real." Barrett glanced at his expensive watch, a Rolex that caught the porch light. "We have a lot to discuss, and it's cold out here. I suggest we move inside." It wasn't a suggestion. The family parted like water as Barrett and his men entered the house. I could see them through the large front window now, Barrett removing his coat with the casual confidence of a man who owned everything he touched. His security took positions by the exits, professional and silent. Barrett looked around the living room, the room where he'd grown up, where we'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays. His expression gave nothing away, but I caught something in his posture. This wasn't a homecoming. This was a reckoning. "Where's my mother?" he asked, and even from outside, I could hear the dangerous quiet in his voice. She left," Malaya stammered. "She tried to force her way in, and I had to ask her to leave." Barrett turned to face her fully, and something in his movement made everyone else take a step back. "You asked my mother to leave? On Christmas, in the snow?" "Barrett, you don't understand. She's not well. She's obsessive about Emma, and it's not healthy." "Not healthy?" Barrett repeated the words slowly, tasting them. "Tell me, Malaya, what exactly is healthy about letting my mother freeze on a porch while you play happy family with her granddaughter?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Malaya's mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, searching for words that wouldn't come. Barrett walked to the window and looked out. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might see me sitting in my car across the street, but his gaze moved past me, taking in the neighborhood, the snow, the cold night where his mother had been abandoned. When he turned back to face the room, I saw something in his profile that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just anger. This was judgment. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years I've been watching. 3 years I've been waiting. 3 years of you thinking you won. He looked at each person in the room, his gaze lingering on their faces like he was memorizing them. Tonight, that ends. Get out. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they hit the room like a physical force. Emma started crying. Michael's wife grabbed her children and pulled them toward the back of the house. Malaya's legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto the couch. "Barrett, please," she whispered, "let me explain." But Barrett was already walking toward the door, his security moving with him. As he stepped back onto the porch, he pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted exactly 10 seconds. Then he looked directly at my car. Even in the darkness, across the street, through the falling snow, our eyes met, and Barrett smiled. The first real emotion I'd seen from him all evening. He was coming home. Barrett walked across the street toward my car with the measured pace of a man who had all the time in the world. Behind him, his security team maintained their positions, one at the house, one by the Rolls-Royce, creating a perimeter that made it clear this was far from over. I sat frozen as my son approached, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. 3 years of grief, 3 years of visiting an empty grave, 3 years of believing I'd lost the only person who truly loved me, and here he was, alive, successful, and looking at me with eyes that held secrets I couldn't begin to imagine. He tapped gently on my window, and I fumbled to roll it down with shaking hands. "Hello, Mom." His voice was warm now, completely different from the cold tone he'd used inside the house. "We need to talk." "Barrett?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Is it really you?" He smiled, and for a moment I saw my son again. Not the intimidating stranger in the expensive coat, but the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "It's me. Can you drive, or should one of my men take your car?" "I can drive." I was operating on autopilot now, my mind too overwhelmed to process anything beyond basic functions. Follow us. We're going to your apartment. The drive to my small apartment complex felt surreal. The Rolls-Royce glided ahead of me through the snowy streets, while I gripped my steering wheel and tried to convince myself this wasn't an elaborate hallucination brought on by grief and loneliness. When we arrived, Barrett's security team efficiently swept my building while he walked beside me to the elevator. Up close, I could see details that both comforted and concerned me. He was healthier than I'd ever seen him, well-fed, well-dressed, with the kind of muscle tone that spoke of regular exercise and good medical care, but there were new lines around his eyes, and something in his expression suggested he'd seen things that had changed him fundamentally. Inside my modest apartment, Barrett looked around with the same careful assessment he'd given the house. His security team positioned themselves by the windows and door while he sat across from me on my threadbare sofa. "I know you'll have questions," he said, removing his leather gloves with deliberate precision. "But first, I need you to understand something. Everything I'm about to tell you stays between us until I say otherwise. Can you promise me that?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Barrett leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and for the first time all evening, he looked vulnerable. 3 years ago, I found out that Malaya was stealing from you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "She'd been forging your signature on checks, using your credit cards, even taking out loans in your name. By the time I discovered it, she'd stolen nearly $40,000 from you." My mouth went dry. $40,000. That explained so much. Why my savings had dwindled faster than expected, why I'd had trouble paying bills, why I'd felt like I was drowning financially even though I'd been careful with money my entire life. "When I confronted her," Barrett continued, "she didn't deny it. She said you were old and wouldn't live much longer anyway, so what did it matter? She said you were a burden on our family and that Emma would be better off without a crazy grandmother confusing her." Each word was a knife to my heart, but I forced myself to listen. That's when I knew I had to act. But I also knew that if I simply divorced her and exposed what she'd done, she'd find a way to spin it. She'd make herself the victim and you the villain. She's very good at that. I thought about the way she's spoken to me on the porch, the careful modulation of her voice to sound reasonable while delivering devastating blows. Yes, she was very good at that. So I faked my death. The simple statement hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. "Barrett, how could you—" "The funeral, the grief, watching you being lowered into the ground? I know." His voice broke slightly. "Watching you cry at my funeral was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was the only way to protect you and to gather evidence of what she was really doing." "Evidence?" Barrett reached into his coat and pulled out a tablet. With a few swipes, he brought up a video that made my blood freeze. It was Malaya sitting in what looked like a lawyer's office, speaking to a man in a suit. "I need to know what my options are." Malaya's voice came clearly through the tablet speakers. "She's not mentally competent anymore. She barely remembers conversations from one day to the next." "That's not true," I whispered, but Barrett held up a hand. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the lawyer's voice continued, "establishing incompetency requires medical documentation." "I can get that," Malaya replied without hesitation. "I know people. The point is, she has a small life insurance policy and some savings. If something happened to her, or if she needed to be placed in a facility, Emma and I should be the beneficiaries. Barrett's gone, so I'm the closest family she has." My hands began to shake as the full scope of her plans became clear. "There's more," Barrett said grimly, switching to another video. This one showed Malaya in my apartment, going through my mail, my financial documents, even my medication bottles. "She had a key," I breathed. "She made a copy when she borrowed yours last year. She's been coming here regularly, going through your things, documenting everything she could use against you." The violation felt worse than the theft. My private space, my sanctuary, had been invaded by someone I trusted. Barrett showed me more evidence, recordings of phone calls where Malaya discussed the old lady problem with friends, emails where she researched nursing homes and elder abuse laws, even a conversation where she coached Emma on what to say if anyone asked about Grandma. She told Emma you were sick in your brain and that's why you acted strange sometimes, Barrett said, his voice tight with anger. She's been systematically erasing you from your granddaughter's life and setting up a narrative where you're mentally incompetent. Why? The question came out as a sob. Why does she hate me so much? Because you see through her. You always have. She could fool me for a while, charm her way through family gatherings, play the perfect wife and mother. But you knew something was wrong, didn't you? I nodded, remembering the countless times I'd felt uneasy around Malaya, the way she'd watch me with calculating eyes, the subtle put-downs disguised as concern for my well-being. She needed you gone to complete her transformation into the grieving widow. With me dead and you discredited or dead, she'd have complete control over Emma and access to whatever assets she could claim. Barrett stood and walked to my window, looking out at the snowy parking lot. I spent 3 years building a new identity, making money, gathering evidence, and watching her destroy you piece by piece. Every family gathering you weren't invited to, every birthday party you missed, every time she told people you were going through a difficult time, I saw it all. You were watching? I never left Mom. I just became invisible. He turned back to me, and I saw pain in his eyes that matched my own. I watched her isolate you, watched the family choose sides, watched you grow smaller and sadder with each passing month. There were nights I almost broke cover, almost came to you, but I knew if I did, she'd win. How did you fake your death? Barrett's smile was grim. It's amazing what you can accomplish with enough money and the right connections. The body they buried wasn't mine. The accident was staged. I've been living under a different name, building a business and preparing for tonight. What business? Import, export. Very lucrative when you know what you're doing. He gestured around my modest apartment. I've been watching your bills, Mom, making sure your utilities stayed on, that your rent was paid. You thought you were managing on your Social Security, but I've been supplementing your income for 2 years. The revelation hit me like a physical force. The mysterious checks that came with no return address. That was me. I couldn't let you suffer while I played dead, but I couldn't risk direct contact either. Barrett sat back down beside me and took my hands in his. They were warm, real, alive. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for what I put you through, but it was the only way to save you from her. Save me from what exactly? Barrett's expression darkened. She was planning to have you declared incompetent and committed to a state facility. She had doctors lined up, witnesses prepared to testify about your declining mental state. She was going to take control of your finances, sell your apartment, and put you somewhere where you'd never see Emma again. The room spun around me as the full horror of her plan sank in. When? Soon? She was waiting for the right moment, probably after the holidays. She wanted to establish a pattern of erratic behavior first. I thought about tonight, about how she'd positioned my desperate attempt to see Emma on Christmas as evidence of my instability, how she'd made me sound obsessive and unhealthy in front of witnesses. She almost succeeded, I whispered. Yes, Barrett said quietly, but she underestimated 2 things. She underestimated how much I love you, and she underestimated how patient I could be when it comes to protecting my family. He stood up and walked to my window again, his silhouette dark against the snowy night. 3 years of watching, waiting, and planning. 3 years of letting her think she won. But tonight we take it all back. What are you going to do? Barrett turned to me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Justice, Mom. I'm going to give her exactly what she gave you. Barrett, I don't want revenge. I just want my family back. And you'll have it. But first, Malaya needs to understand that actions have consequences. He checked his watch again. By now, my people have finished their work at the house. Tomorrow morning, Malaya is going to discover just how precarious her position really is. What do you mean? The house she's been living in? I bought the mortgage 3 months ago. The credit cards she's been using? Mine. The bank accounts she thinks are secure? Also mine. Barrett's smile grew wider. She's been living on my money in my house, stealing from my mother, and tomorrow that all ends. I stared at my son, this stranger who wore Barrett's face, but spoke with the cold calculation of someone I didn't recognize. Who are you now? Barrett's expression softened slightly. I'm your son, Mom. I'm just a version of your son who learned what people are really capable of. And I learned that sometimes, to protect the people you love, you have to become someone they might not recognize. He sat back down beside me and took my hands again. But I'm still me. I still love terrible movies and overcooked pasta. I still think your Christmas cookies are the best in the world. And I still need my mom. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. So what happens now? Barrett's smile was warm now. Genuine. Now we go home. Tomorrow we start rebuilding. And Malaya learns that dead men tell no tales, but living sons remember everything. The next morning arrived gray and cold, but I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Barrett had stayed the night, sleeping on my couch like he had as a teenager when he'd fought with his father. Having him there, breathing and real, felt like a miracle I was afraid to fully believe. My phone started ringing at 7:30 in the morning. Then it rang again and again. Let it ring, Barrett said from the kitchen, where he was making coffee with the expensive beans he'd brought from his car. They're panicking now. By 8 o'clock, I had 17 missed calls from various family members. Barrett handed me a cup of coffee and sat beside me as I scrolled through the voicemail messages. Michael's voice came through first, shaky and confused. Marion, I don't understand what's happening. Barrett was here last night, but that's impossible. Can you call me back? Please? Then Malaya's voice, high and strained. Marion, we need to talk. Something's wrong. Something's very wrong. Barrett's alive, but he's different, and I think someone's manipulating him. You need to help me figure this out. Barrett laughed, a sound that held no humor. Still trying to make herself the victim. The last message was from Emma, and hearing my granddaughter's confused little voice nearly broke my heart. Grandma Marion? Mommy's crying, and she won't tell me why. She said Daddy came back, but he's not my daddy anymore. I'm scared. Barrett's jaw tightened. That ends today. At 10 o'clock sharp, Barrett's phone buzzed. It's time, he said, standing and straightening his tie. He dressed in another expensive suit, this one navy blue that made his eyes look darker. Are you ready for this? I nodded, though I wasn't sure what this would entail. Remember, you don't say anything unless they ask you a direct question. Let me handle everything else. We drove back to the house in Barrett's Rolls-Royce, with his security team following in a separate car. The neighborhood looked different in daylight. Smaller somehow, less intimidating. As we pulled into the driveway, I could see faces at windows throughout the street. News of Barrett's return had spread quickly in a community where everyone knew everyone else's business. Barrett's bodyguard knocked on the door while we stood behind him. When Malaya opened it, she looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her makeup was smeared, her hair unwashed, and her eyes were red and swollen. Barrett, she breathed, and for a moment genuine emotion flickered across her face. Relief, joy, confusion, all mixing together in an expression that almost looked authentic. Malaya. Barrett's voice was neutral, professional. We need to finish our conversation from last night. Yes, of course. Please come in. I'm so sorry about how I acted. I was just shocked and I didn't understand. You understood perfectly. Barrett cut her off as we entered the living room. The entire family was there, gathered like they'd been waiting for hours. Michael and his wife Sarah sat on the couch with their 2 kids pressed close to their sides. Barrett's Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert occupied the chairs by the fireplace. Even Malaya's mother Patricia was there, having apparently driven down from Sacramento overnight. And there was Emma, my beautiful granddaughter, sitting on the floor by her toy box, but watching the adults with big, frightened eyes. Barrett surveyed the room like a general reviewing his troops. I asked you all here because there are some things that need to be said, things that should have been said a long time ago. Barrett, sweetheart, Malaya started, her voice taking on the sweet, reasonable tone I knew so well. I know yesterday was confusing, but we can work through this. Whatever's been happening to you, wherever you've been, we can— Sit down, Malaya. The command was quiet but absolute. Malaya sank onto the nearest chair as if her strings had been cut. Barrett reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. For the past 3 years, you've all believed I was dead. You attended my funeral, mourned my loss, and watched my wife struggle as a single mother. What you didn't know was that I've been watching all of you. He opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph. This is Malaya entering my mother's apartment 6 months ago, using a key she made without permission. The photo was clear, time-stamped, undeniable. Malaya's face went white. This is her going through my mother's financial documents, photographing bank statements and medication bottles. More photos. Malaya searching through my desk, my closet, even my refrigerator. And this, Barrett said, pulling out a USB drive, contains recordings of conversations where Malaya discussed her plans for my mother's future. He connected the drive to his laptop and set it up so everyone could see the screen. Malaya's voice filled the room, crystal clear. The old bat is losing it anyway. If I can get her declared incompetent, I can control her finances and get her out of Emma's life permanently. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked confused, but the adults understood perfectly. Michael's mouth hung open. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. Even Patricia looked shocked. That's taken out of context, Malaya stammered. Barrett played another recording. This time it was Malaya on the phone with someone discussing which nursing homes had the worst reputations, specifically looking for places where difficult patients might have accidents. Linda gasped. Robert stood up so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. My God, Malaya, what were you planning? Nothing. I wasn't planning anything. These recordings are fake. They have to be. Barrett pulled out another document. This is a copy of the power of attorney papers you had drawn up, naming yourself as my mother's legal guardian in case of mental incompetence. Papers you never told her about. He handed the document to Michael, who read it with growing horror. Jesus, Malaya, this gives you control over everything. Her money, her medical decisions, even where she lives. It's just a precaution, Malaya said desperately. Marion's been acting strange lately. Everyone's noticed it. I just wanted to make sure someone could take care of her if needed. Acting strange how? Barrett's voice could have cut glass. Well, she's been forgetful. And obsessive about Emma. She shows up at inappropriate times, makes demands. Like wanting to see her granddaughter on Christmas? Barrett gestured to me, and I realized this was my cue. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and showed them the text I'd received from Malaya just yesterday. Marion, the family has decided it's best if you don't join us for Christmas this year. Emma finds your visits upsetting, and we think it's time you focused on your own life. Michael took my phone and read the message aloud. When he finished, he looked at his sister-in-law with disgust. You told her Emma finds her visits upsetting? Emma barely knows her anymore, Malaya said, but her voice was getting weaker. Because you've been systematically preventing her from seeing Emma, Barrett said. He pulled out another stack of papers. These are copies of emails you sent to family members telling them my mother was having mental health issues and that they should limit contact with her for their own protection. Sarah leaned forward. That's why you said she couldn't babysit anymore. You said she'd become unreliable. I said she was having memory problems and it wasn't safe. She was having financial problems, Barrett interrupted, because you were stealing from her. He pulled out bank statements highlighted in yellow to show the fraudulent transactions. Credit card bills for purchases Malaya had made. Loan applications filed in my name. $47,000, Barrett said, his voice deadly quiet. That's how much you stole from my mother over 2 years. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched as the family members did the math in their heads, understanding finally why I'd seemed to struggle financially, why I'd stopped contributing to group gifts, why I'd appeared to be declining, just as Malaya had claimed. That's impossible, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Malaya wouldn't. I have the documentation from 3 different banks, 2 credit card companies, and a loan agency, Barrett said calmly. Would you like to see the forged signatures? He spread out papers showing my signature compared to Malaya's attempts to forge it. Even I could see the differences, though they were subtle enough that a busy bank teller might miss them. Emma had moved closer to the adults, sensing the tension but not understanding it. She tugged on Malaya's sleeve. Mommy, why is everyone angry? Malaya picked up Emma with shaking hands. It's okay, baby. The grown-ups are just having a discussion. About Grandma Marion? Emma looked at me with curious eyes. Mommy said you were sick and that's why I couldn't see you anymore. The innocence in her voice was heartbreaking. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her, but Barrett caught my eye and shook his head slightly. Emma, Barrett said gently, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. Do you remember me? Emma studied his face carefully. You look like my daddy, but Mommy said my daddy went to heaven. Sometimes adults have to go away for a while to take care of important things. But I'm back now, and I'm going to make sure everything is okay. He stood and faced the room again. Malaya has been lying to all of you. She's been stealing from my mother, isolating her from her family, and planning to have her declared mentally incompetent so she could control her life completely. But why? Linda asked, her voice small and confused. Money, Barrett said simply. Control. And revenge against the one person who never believed her act. He turned to Malaya, who was clutching Emma like a shield. You thought if you got rid of my mother, you'd have free reign? No one to question your stories, no one to notice the inconsistencies. You could play the perfect widow, raise Emma however you wanted, and no one would ever know what you really are. What I really am, Malaya's voice rose, taking on a hysterical edge. I'm Emma's mother. I'm the one who's been taking care of her while you were gone. I'm the one who's been protecting her from that woman's obsession. That woman, Barrett said quietly, is Emma's grandmother. The woman who helped bring her home from the hospital. The woman who babysat her while you went out partying. The woman who spent the last 3 years grieving for her son while you systematically destroyed her life. Barrett walked over to Emma and gently took her from Malaya's arms. Emma went to him willingly, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Emma, he said softly, would you like to go play in your room for a little while? The grown-ups need to finish talking. Will Grandma Marion still be here? When I come back? Emma asked, looking at me with hope in her eyes. Yes, Barrett promised. Grandma Marion will always be here for you. After Emma disappeared upstairs, Barrett turned back to face Malaya. The gentleness was gone from his expression, replaced by something cold and final. Pack your things, he said quietly. You have 24 hours to get out of my house. Your house? Malaya laughed, but it sounded forced. This is my house. Our house. You're legally dead, Barrett. You can't just... Barrett smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. Actually, I can. I've been very busy these past 3 years. Would you like to see the paperwork? Barrett walked to his briefcase with the measured confidence of a man who held all the cards. When he returned, he carried a manila envelope thick with legal documents. 3 years is a long time to prepare, he said, spreading papers across the coffee table that had once held Emma's coloring books and my Christmas gifts. Long enough to establish a new identity, build a fortune, and buy back everything that mattered. The first document he showed was a deed. The house. Purchased through a shell company 8 months ago when you defaulted on the mortgage payments. Malaya's face went chalk white. That's impossible. The payments were automatic. From an account I controlled, Barrett said smoothly. An account that stopped making payments the moment I decided it was time. Michael leaned forward to examine the deed. Barrett, this says the house was bought by something called Meridian Holdings. That's my company. Barrett's smile was razor sharp. I've been quite successful in my new life. Import-export has been very lucrative. Sarah spoke up, her voice shaky. But if you own the house and you've been alive all this time, then what about life insurance? What about... What about the $200,000 Malaya collected on my life insurance policy? Barrett finished. That's an interesting question. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the old house settling around us. Malaya's breathing became rapid and shallow. I never collected any life insurance, she whispered. Barrett pulled out another stack of papers. Pacific Life Insurance, policy number 7498821. Beneficiary Malaya Rodriguez. Amount paid, $200,000. Date of payment, 6 months after my supposed death. He spread out bank statements showing the deposit, withdrawal records, and purchase receipts. You used it to buy a new car, take Emma to Disneyland, and renovate the kitchen. You also gave $10,000 to your mother and $15,000 to your sister Jennifer. Patricia gasped from her chair. Malaya, you told me that money came from Barrett's savings account? It did. The insurance was just... Malaya's words tumbled over each other as she tried to find an explanation that didn't make her a criminal. Insurance fraud is a federal crime, Barrett said conversationally. Collecting life insurance on someone you know is alive carries a penalty of up to 20 years in prison. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. Barrett, son, maybe we should... Should what? Forgive her. Barrett's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Should I overlook the fact that she stole from my mother, isolated her from her family, and was planning to have her committed to a state facility? He pulled out more documents. These are the medical evaluations Malaya commissioned. 3 different doctors, all of whom were paid to assess my mother's mental competency without her knowledge. Linda took the papers with trembling hands. They say Marion shows signs of dementia and paranoid behavior. Based on Malaya's testimony alone, Barrett said, none of these doctors ever actually examined my mother. They wrote their reports based entirely on Malaya's descriptions of her behavior. I felt sick as the scope of her plan became clear. She'd been building a case against me for months, creating a paper trail that would support her claims of my incompetency. The plan was elegant, Barrett continued, his tone almost admiring. Have Mom declared incompetent, gain control of her finances, put her in a facility where she couldn't interfere, and raise Emma without any outside influence, all while playing the devoted daughter-in-law who was just trying to do what was best for everyone. Emma's voice drifted down from upstairs, singing softly to herself as she played. The sound was innocence itself, a reminder of what Malaya had been willing to sacrifice for her own agenda. There's more, Barrett said, and I wondered how there could possibly be more. The apartment complex where my mother lives? I own that too. Bought it 18 months ago when the previous owner went bankrupt. He showed us another deed, another set of financial documents. Malaya had been pressuring the old management company to evict my mother for disturbing behavior. She filed multiple complaints about noise, inappropriate visitors, and failure to maintain her unit. Michael shook his head in disbelief. Marion's the quietest person I know. She barely has any visitors. Exactly. But if you create enough complaints, build enough of a pattern, you can make anyone look problematic. Barrett's expression was grim. She was laying groundwork for the incompetency claim, a pattern of antisocial behavior that would support her narrative. Barrett walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood where he'd grown up. I watched her do it piece by piece. Every lie, every manipulation, every small cruelty designed to break my mother's spirit and isolate her from anyone who might defend her. He turned back to face Malaya, who was now visibly shaking. Did you really think no one would ever find out? Did you think you could destroy my mother's life and face no consequences? I was protecting Emma, Malaya said desperately. Your mother was becoming obsessive, possessive. She was confusing Emma with her grief, making her think Barrett was coming back. My mother never told Emma I was coming back, Barrett said coldly. But Emma did ask about me, didn't she? And instead of helping her process her grief, you used it as evidence of my mother's unhealthy influence. Barrett sat down across from Malaya, his posture relaxed, but his eyes deadly serious. Let me tell you what's going to happen now. You're going to pack your things and leave this house. You're going to return every penny you stole from my mother, plus interest. And you're going to sign custody papers giving me full custody of Emma. No. The word came out as a snarl. I won't let you take my daughter." "Your daughter?" Barrett's voice was dangerously quiet. "Let's talk about Emma for a moment." He pulled out his phone and showed us a video. It was Emma, maybe 2 years old, crying inconsolably while Malaya yelled at her to stop being dramatic. The timestamp showed it was taken just after my supposed death. "She was missing her daddy," Barrett said, his voice tight with emotion. "She was a baby who didn't understand why he wasn't coming home, and instead of comforting her, you screamed at her for having normal grief reactions." Another video showed Malaya roughly handling Emma during a diaper change, her movements sharp and impatient. "Stop squirming, you little brat. I don't have time for this." "Where did you get these?" Malaya's voice was barely a whisper. "Security cameras. I had them installed before I died, just in case." Barrett's smile was cold. "I have hours of footage, Malaya. Hours of you losing your temper with a grieving toddler. Hours of you on the phone complaining about what a burden she was. Hours of you treating my daughter like an inconvenience." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. "Malaya, how could you?" "You don't understand," Malaya said frantically. "It's been hard, raising her alone. Sometimes I lose my temper, but every parent does that. It means you're not fit to be her mother," Barrett said simply, "and now I have the documentation to prove it." He stood and walked to the mantel where a photo of Emma's first birthday party sat in a silver frame. In the picture, I was holding Emma while she reached for her cake, both of us laughing. It was one of the last photos taken before Barrett's supposed death, before everything changed. "Emma deserves better than you," Barrett said without turning around. "She deserves a mother who loves her unconditionally, not someone who sees her as a meal ticket or a burden to be managed." "I do love her," Malaya protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Barrett finally turned around, and the look on his face was devastating. "You love what she represents. You love the sympathy you get as a single mother. You love the control you have over her, but you don't love her." He walked back to his briefcase and pulled out one final document. "This is a custody agreement. Sign it, and you can have supervised visitation once a month. Refuse to sign it, and I'll file criminal charges for insurance fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and child endangerment." Malaya looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, someone who might take her side. But the evidence was overwhelming, and even her own mother was staring at her with horror and disgust. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I'm her mother." "Biology doesn't make you a mother," Barrett said quietly. "Love does. Sacrifice does. Putting your child's needs above your own does. You've never done any of those things." He placed a pen beside the custody agreement. "You have 60 seconds to decide. Sign the papers and walk away with some dignity, or refuse and face the consequences of everything you've done." Malaya stared at the papers, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen. Around her, the family that had once supported her sat in stunned silence, processing the full scope of her betrayal. 50 seconds, Barrett said softly. Emma's laughter drifted down from upstairs, innocent and joyful. She had no idea that her world was being rearranged below her, that the woman she called Mommy was about to disappear from her life. 40 seconds. Malaya looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "This is all your fault. If you had just minded your own business, if you had just stayed away." 30 seconds. With a strangled sob, Malaya grabbed the pen and signed her name on the custody agreement. Her signature was shaky and barely legible, but it was legal. Barrett collected the papers immediately, checking each signature before sliding them back into his briefcase. "Thank you. That was the smart choice." Malaya stood up unsteadily, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "I want to say goodbye to Emma." "No." Barrett's voice was final. "You'll only confuse her. I'll explain things to her in a way she can understand. She's my daughter. She was your daughter. Now she's my responsibility, and I won't let you traumatize her any further." Barrett gestured to his security team, who had been waiting silently by the door. "Please escort Ms. Rodriguez to her car, Make sure she takes only her personal belongings. As Malaya was led away, she turned back one last time. You'll regret this, Barrett. Both of you. Emma will grow up knowing you kept her from her mother. Barrett's expression didn't change. Emma will grow up knowing she's loved and protected. That's all that matters. The front door closed behind Malaya with a soft click, and suddenly the house felt different. Lighter somehow, as if an oppressive weight had been lifted. Barrett sat down heavily in his chair and ran his hands through his hair. For the first time since his return, he looked tired. Is it over? I asked quietly. Barrett looked up at me with eyes that held both exhaustion and relief. It's over, Mom. She can't hurt you anymore. She can't hurt any of us anymore. From upstairs, Emma called down, Daddy, can Grandma Marion come up and see my toys? Barrett smiled, and for the first time in 3 years, it reached his eyes. Yes, sweetheart. Grandma Marion can see your toys. As I climbed the stairs toward my granddaughter's voice, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope for the future. Barrett had kept his promise. He'd brought our family back together, and this time, no one would tear us apart. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Barrett's new house, watching through the window as he pushed Emma on the swing set he'd installed in the backyard. Her delighted laughter carried on the spring breeze, a sound I'd thought I might never hear again. The house was different from the one we'd left behind. Bigger, yes, but also warmer somehow. Barrett had chosen it specifically with Emma and me in mind. A large kitchen where I could teach Emma to bake, a library where we could read together, and a guest suite that had quietly become my permanent home. Higher, Daddy, higher. Emma's voice rang out, full of joy and security. Barrett had been patient with Emma's adjustment to the truth about her mother. He'd explained things simply, that Mommy had made some bad choices and needed to go away for a while, but that Daddy was back now, and Grandma Marion would always be here to take care of her. Emma had cried at first, confused and frightened by the sudden changes, but children are resilient and surrounded by love and stability. She'd begun to flourish. The sound of the front door opening interrupted my thoughts. Michael's voice called out from the hallway. Anyone home? In the kitchen, I called back, smiling as Emma's cousins burst through the door ahead of their parents. Aunt Marion! 7-year-old Jake launched himself at me for a hug, while his sister Lily ran straight to the window to wave at Emma. Michael and Sarah followed more sedately, carrying a casserole dish and a bottle of wine. These Sunday dinners had become a tradition, a way for our family to rebuild the connections that Malaya had systematically destroyed. How's she doing? Sarah asked quietly, nodding toward the window where Emma was now trying to teach Barrett how to properly pump his legs on the swing beside hers. Better every day, I said honestly. She still asks about her mother sometimes, but less frequently. And when she does, we just remind her that sometimes people make choices that mean they can't be with the people they love, but that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It was a careful balance, not demonizing Malaya in Emma's mind, while still protecting her from the truth she was too young to understand. Barrett had found a child psychologist who specialized in family transitions, and Dr. Martinez had been invaluable in helping us navigate these conversations. Sarah set down the casserole and gave me a gentle hug. I owe you an apology, Marion. We all do. We should have seen what was happening. We should have questioned why you suddenly became so absent from family events. Over the past months, the family had slowly come to terms with their role in my isolation. None of them had been malicious, but they'd been willfully blind to signs that should have raised questions. It had been easier to believe Malaya's carefully crafted narrative than to investigate inconsistencies. You weren't looking for deception, I said gently. None of us were. Malaya was very good at what she did. Michael joined us in the kitchen, his expression still carrying traces of the guilt he'd been wrestling with. I keep thinking about all the times you tried to connect with us, all the invitations we declined because Malaya said you were going through a difficult time. How could we have been so blind? Barrett entered through the back door, Emma riding piggyback and giggling as he pretended to stumble under her weight. Because she's a psychopath, he said matter-of-factly, swinging Emma down to run and play with her cousins. Psychopaths are expert manipulators. They know exactly how to exploit people's desire to avoid conflict. It had taken Barrett time to say those words without anger. In the early days after his return, his rage had been palpable, controlled but burning just beneath the surface. Therapy had helped him too. Not just individual sessions, but family therapy, where we'd all learn to communicate in ways that honored our trauma while building toward healing. "Any word from the prosecutor's office?" Michael asked quietly. Barrett's expression hardened slightly. "Trial set for September. The insurance fraud charges alone will put her away for 5 to 10 years. Add in the elder abuse and identity theft charges, and she's looking at 15 years minimum." Malaya had tried to flee the state after signing the custody papers, but Barrett's security team had been tracking her movements. She'd been arrested at the airport with a bag full of cash and a fake passport. The desperation of her attempted escape had only strengthened the prosecutor's case. "What about her mother?" Sarah asked. Patricia seemed genuinely shocked when everything came out. "Patricia's cooperating fully with the investigation," Barrett said. "She's returning the $10,000 Malaya gave her, even though she didn't know it was stolen insurance money. She wants to maintain a relationship with Emma, and I'm considering it. Emma needs to understand that just because one person in a family makes bad choices doesn't mean the whole family is bad." It was a lesson I was still learning myself. For months after Barrett's return, I'd struggled with my own anger and sense of betrayal, not just toward Malaya, but toward myself for not seeing through her manipulations sooner. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that victims of psychological abuse often blame themselves for not recognizing the signs, but that self-blame only perpetuates the damage. Emma ran back into the kitchen, her cheeks flushed from playing outside. "Grandma Marion, can we make cookies after dinner?" "Of course, sweetheart." "What kind would you like to make?" "Chocolate chip. And can Jake and Lily help?" "Absolutely. We'll make enough for everyone to take some home." Emma beamed and ran back to her cousins, already planning the cookie-making adventure. These simple moments, the kind I'd been denied for 3 years, felt precious beyond measure. As we sat down for dinner, Barrett raised his wine glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying the weight of everything we'd been through. "To second chances, to family, and to the truth that sets us free." We clinked glasses, even the children joining in with their milk cups. Around this table, in this house filled with laughter and love, it was hard to remember the darkness we'd emerged from. Later, after Michael's family had gone home and Emma was tucked into bed, Barrett and I sat on the porch swing he'd installed to replace the one from the old house. The evening was warm, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant traffic. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked quietly. "The 3 years you lost, the elaborate deception, all of it?" Barrett was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "I regret the pain it caused you. I regret that Emma had to suffer through those years with Malaya. I regret that we lost time we can never get back." He paused, looking out at the street where children were playing in other yards, their parents watching from porches like ours. "But I don't regret doing what was necessary to protect you, and I don't regret ensuring that Malaya can never hurt anyone again." "What made you think of it?" "Faking your death, I mean. That's not exactly a normal response to discovering your wife is stealing." Barrett smiled grimly. I'd been researching her background after I found the first forged check. She'd done this before, to her previous boyfriend's elderly father. She'd isolated him from his family, gained his trust, and was systematically draining his accounts when he died of a sudden heart attack. My blood ran cold. "You think she killed him?" "I think she was prepared to let him die when it became convenient. The heart attack might have been natural, but she made no effort to get him help when it happened. She just called the paramedics after he was already gone and played the devoted caregiver." Barrett's jaw tightened. "When I realized what she was capable of, I knew I had to get her away from you permanently, but I also knew that if I simply divorced her and made accusations, she'd disappear and start over with someone else." "So you created a situation where she'd reveal her true nature?" "I gave her enough rope to hang herself, and she did exactly that. Every choice she made after my death was her own. I just made sure there were witnesses." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Finally, Barrett spoke again. I want you to know that you never have to worry about money again. The business has been very successful, and I've set up accounts that will ensure you're comfortable for the rest of your life. Barrett, you need security. You need to know that you'll never again be in a position where someone can exploit your vulnerabilities. His voice was firm but gentle. Consider it partial payment for 35 years of unconditional love. Tears pricked my eyes. You don't owe me anything for loving you. That's what mothers do. Not all mothers, not Malaya. Barrett took my hand. Emma's going to grow up knowing what real love looks like because of you. She's going to understand the difference between someone who cares for her and someone who uses her. What about you? Will you ever trust someone enough to love again? Barrett was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Maybe someday. But right now my priority is Emma, and you, and rebuilding what we lost. You've already rebuilt it, I said softly. This, sitting here with you, knowing Emma's safe upstairs, knowing that tomorrow we'll wake up as a family, this is more than I ever dared hope for during those 3 years. Barrett squeezed my hand. I promised you once that I'd always protect you. I know it seemed like I broke that promise, but I never did. Even when you thought I was gone, I was watching over you. I know that now, and I'm proud of you, not just for saving us, but for becoming the kind of man who would sacrifice everything to protect the people he loves. From upstairs, Emma's voice called softly, Grandma Marion, can you come tell me a story? I stood, smiling at the sound that had become my favorite thing in the world. Coming, sweetheart. As I climbed the stairs to Emma's room, I reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a forgotten woman, isolated and discarded by the family I'd loved. Tonight, I was going to tuck my granddaughter into bed in a house where I was wanted, needed, and cherished. Emma was waiting in her bed, holding the teddy bear I'd brought to the hospital on that terrible Christmas night, the one Malaya had rejected but Barrett had quietly retrieved and given to Emma as a gift from Grandma Marion. What story would you like tonight? I asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. Tell me about when Daddy was little, Emma said, as she did most nights. Tell me about when he was my age. I smiled and began the familiar story about the time Barrett had tried to bake me a birthday cake when he was 5 and had used salt instead of sugar. Emma giggled at all the right places, even though she'd heard the story dozens of times. When I finished, Emma was quiet, for a moment. Then she said, Grandma Marion, I'm glad Daddy came back. I'm glad you came back too. I never really left, sweetheart. I was just waiting for the right time to come home. Are you going to stay forever now? I leaned down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. Forever and always, my darling girl. Forever and always. As I turned off her light and closed her door, I realized that Barrett had given me more than just my family back. He'd given me a future worth living, a purpose worth waking up for, and the knowledge that love, real love, always finds a way home. The house was quiet now, Barrett having gone to his study to work on some business matters. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table looking through the photo album I'd been creating. Pictures of our new life together. Emma's first day at her new school, Barrett teaching her to ride a bike, family dinners with Michael and Sarah, quiet moments of reading together on the couch. These were the moments Malaya had tried to steal from us. These were the memories she'd wanted to prevent us from making. But here we were, creating them anyway, building something beautiful from the ashes of what she'd tried to destroy. I'd lost 3 years with my granddaughter, but I had decades ahead of us. Barrett had lost 3 years of his life, but he'd used that time to ensure our future security. We'd all paid a price for Malaya's greed and cruelty, but we'd survived it. More than survived, we'd triumphed. As I climbed the stairs to my own room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to love and be loved. But tonight my family was safe. My granddaughter was sleeping peacefully down the hall, and my son was home where he belonged. At 62 years old, I was finally free to live the life I'd always wanted, surrounded by people who valued me, protected by love that couldn't be shaken, and secure in the knowledge that some bonds truly are unbreakable. The nightmare was over, the rest of our lives could finally begin. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.